You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion. Britain invented the penny post in the 19th century, but from the end of this month, it's going to cost 60 of them just to send a first-class letter. The price of a first-class stamp will rise from 46p to 60p. Last year, Royal Mail delivered 16 billion letters, but in an age of texts, emails, tweets and Facebook, is there still a role for postal deliveries, or will the price rise be the final nail in the coffin for the postal service? Joining me is Dr. Chris Hutchinson from the School of Computing and Information Systems at Kingston University in London. David Stubbs is Managing Director at ESL and Network Postal Consultants. And Simon Bottery is Director of Policy at Independent Age. They provide advice and support for older people. Simon, I'll come to you first. It's a vital lifeline, isn't it, for older people?
Yes, it is. It's incredibly important to many older people. Essentially, the older you are, the more likely it is that you're not going to have internet access, you're not going to be using it on a regular basis, and the more likely it is that you're going to be relying on the postal system to pay your bills and to write to your friends and relatives. So it is incredibly important, and it can be easily forgotten, I think, as we rush towards the sort of new digital age.
Dr. Hutchinson, I'm sure that you'd say, well, there's better alternatives.
I think there are alternatives that are more widely used now, but mostly by a younger generation. I still see the need for postal mail, and I think one of the things that may well have effectively pushed people to use digital communication was the closure of local post offices under the Blair government. It's now so difficult to find a post office. We had two in our village. They've both gone now. We have to travel several miles there. So I think this has probably urged people to move away from postal communication to digital.
David Stubbs, do you think there's a future for the postal service?
I think there is absolutely a future for the postal service, but that future is increasingly around distribution rather than communication. We can see that people aren't sending as many letters. Where they're using the postal service as consumers, they tend to send Christmas cards and postcards, birthday cards, rather than personal correspondence. But they are increasingly relying on postal providers to deliver goods that they've bought online.
Do you think that we are just going to witness the demise of the postal service now that the price rise has come in, or the price rise will come in at the end of April?
I don't think so. I think what we'll see is actually Royal Mail making considerably more money. Most people who use its services are trapped to do so, if you can pardon that expression. They tend to use the service where they don't have alternatives electronically at the moment due to security concerns, or simply where consumers don't want to be communicated to electronically.
But aren't there better alternatives now? If I come to you, Simon, why can't we just teach the elderly generation to use laptops, to use the internet? I sat down with my grandparents when they first got a computer. I showed them how to email. I get a couple of emails a week from my grandmother. Surely now we need to look at better alternatives. We're living in a digital age.
Of course, and there are many families like yourselves that are doing exactly that, and many older people who are users. But I think you have to accept the reality that someone who grew up in a different digital age, perhaps living on a very small income, perhaps living alone with few family, to expect that, or lots of those sorts of people to realistically be finding outline about getting the best broadband deal for themselves and be able to afford it, it's just not realistic. There's lots of work gone into encouraging older people to use email, and it has had an impact. I don't think there's any doubt about it, but there's no escaping the fact that when you look at the over 75s, for example, they're far less likely to be using to have online access than younger people. example. And even where they do have that access at home, it tends to be with equipment that is older, and they tend not to have sort of broadband speed. So I think we just have to be realistic about that. And also, this is a generation that grew up using letters and writing letters. And actually, it shouldn't be about simply saying, well, actually, you've got to switch. There should be a place for people to be able to communicate and to correspond with people in the manner that they choose.
Is there a fear among the older generation of this new technology and of communicating via email rather than picking up the phone or writing to Mrs. Jenkins that lives down the road?
I don't think it's a fear. I think that there's obviously an issue about the cost and the expense of doing it. I think it's more that people grew up using, writing, and that's what they're used to. As a charity, we get about 200 or 300 letters every month from older people that we work with to say thank you or to write in and to ask comments. Now, some of those people do use email, but actually writing letters is something that this generation grew up doing, and they should be allowed to do that, and you should be able to respond, and we shouldn't have to assume that everybody has to use email. There are different ways of communication, and they shouldn't be essentially priced out of the market of communicating with people.
Is there a trouble then that we're going to see? It's something that we get with the internet, is that a lot of the best deals are available online and a lot of things aren't available offline. Is there a worry now that the same thing is happening to the elderly generation with this kind of thing?
Oh, I think that's absolutely the case. If you want the best deal for your house insurance or for your electricity or your gas, increasingly you have to do that online, and often there's a discount for doing that online. There's a discount for paying by direct debit rather than sending a cheque. So older people who don't have access to the internet and faster speeds in particular, find that they do have to pay more for goods and services than younger generations or people that do have online access.
Simon, you just touched on something very interesting. You're from Independent Age. You obviously work with older people and provide them with advice and support. And you said that paying by online, you get discounts for direct debits, and also increasingly you're getting discounts for going paperless. Do you think, Dr. Hutchinson, you're from the School of Computing and Information Systems, do you think we're going to see increasingly more things going online?
I think there will. And I think that we're very much in a society in transition at the moment. The internet in historical terms hasn't been around for very long. First package managed network was in 1969. I was already 17 years old then, so I didn't grow up with computers. And it became a consumer reality only in the early 1990s. So the generation that has grown up with computers is very much, probably the under 40s, under 50s. The older generation are in many cases taking up, they are getting broadband accounts, they're starting to use computers and use the internet. But effectively, we are a society in transition that is moving towards the kind of experience that younger people have. For example, 83% of all virtual world users are between the ages of 5 and 18, and that's a phenomenal figure. We are becoming a world where digital communication is a natural expectation, not only for one's personal life, but also in work and entertainment, business. So I think that in 10 to 15 years from now, when that older generation who grew up with the written letter has passed on elsewhere, this will become a non-issue. More will go online. It's inevitably the case. So I think really what we're living through at the moment is just that moment of transition, which will be a very short period. And the new generation, the under 40s, the under 50s, will actually no longer think. They will find it as quaint and archaic to be writing letters and putting them in the post. As, for example, my parents' generation felt it was quaint and antiquated to travel to work by horse and cart.
Simon, is this a move in the wrong direction for you? Does this upset you hearing what Dr. Hutchinson has got to say?
I don't think it upsets me, but I'm not absolutely certain that we'll go quite as far as Dr. Hutchins thinks. I mean, in general, new technologies tend to supplement old technologies, particularly in communication. So if you look at the technologies that have disappeared, it's really things that have been replaced by something complete, that do exactly the same job. So we don't use telegrams anymore, but actually, we thought that radio would disappear when the cinema arrived or when television arrives, and actually it hung around. And there is a value to written communications. There's clearly a value to written communications, and it has a different quality to electronic communication. So whilst it's clear that obviously, as you say, letter writing is, the postage service is declining by about 5% year on year, I don't think we'll get to the point where it completely disappears. I think there will always be a need for people to send a handwritten thank you note to someone. Is a very different thing from sending them an email to say thank you. It's a very different thing. It means a lot more as well, I think.
I just want to play a clip of someone that we spoke to just before this discussion. Unfortunately, they couldn't be with us. It's Dr. Rosemary Sassoon. She's a specialist in handwriting and a creator of Sassoon typefaces. Now, it's the second clip that I spoke to her of. She said there's something special in when you write letters, and you can't ever get the same thing from using a computer.
I think most of the people who communicate by email do so already. I mean, I use email enormously myself, but a handwritten letter is something different. Do you really want to write your love letters over the computer in email? And from the person receiving, it's something very special to actually receive a handwritten envelope even these days. You pick up your mail and everything is junk mail or computerized, and then, hey, there's handwriting. Oh, wow, that's my mother, or that's my girlfriend, or something. It's something different, even the sight of a handwritten envelope, because it is your print. It is you on paper.
David Stubbs, I want to come to you. You're a postal consultant. There's something quite nice in what Dr. Sassoon was saying there. We're all smiling around the table that you just can't get the same thing from an email when you receive it as a handwritten note.
That's absolutely true, and that's partly why the large mailers still send things physically by post, because what applies for a letter also applies probably in maybe a more negative sense for a bill or an advert. Getting something physical through the post has a different value, and if you get a letter you feel good and you're really appreciative that somebody's taken the effort to do that. But if you get a bill, you may be marginally more inclined to pay it. And if you get an advert, you may be slightly more tempted to buy the good. And there is a value in the physical mail. And I agree with what was said earlier, that most of the items that can be substituted electronically have already been substituted. It's only some of the more physical, legal and formal documents that aren't able to be substituted now. So I think it is the case that postal providers have a good future, not just because they can deliver things bought online, which of course is growing substantially in terms of revenues every year, but also that people do prefer to have a physical communication.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion on the future of the Postal Service. Joining me is Dr. Chris Hutchinson from the School of Computing and Information Systems at Kingston University in London. David Stubbs is Managing Director at ESL and Network Consultancy. And Simon Bottery is Director of Policy at Independent Age. Dr. Hutchinson, legal documents, they're not yet online. A number of other documents aren't yet online, but surely that's only a matter of years away.
Less than a matter of years. I have been using, signing, receiving legal documents and returning them with digital signatures for some years now. For example, all submissions of proposals and legal contracts to the European Commission are now done as digital documents and signed digitally. And of course, signed digitally, there's far less chance of fraud, for example, as would be with a physical signature. I mean, I must say that being the generation that I am, I do have a lot of sympathy with. And I mean, I still handwrite with a fountain pen, and I think I'm the only person I know who still uses a fountain pen, so that probably does show my age. Legal documents and even delivery of goods and services is increasingly dominating the way that we live, the way we do business, the way we teach. One of the things that I do most of my teaching without ever meeting my students face to face.
But is that a good thing? I remember a lot of my lectures were done online, and also with the legal documents, you said, that it's safer. But is it a good thing not being taught in person?
I think that since on the 2nd of February 2009, our university, as many universities in London and throughout the southeast, were closed because of the snowstorms, which transport was cancelled. On the Monday afternoon, the university secretary emailed out to everybody in the university saying that all lectures were cancelled and the university was closed. Now, I had a class on Tuesday morning. Only one class in the entire university took place, and therefore the students were let down by the university, by everybody except for me, because I delivered that lecture online. So it was the only lecture in the entire university that went ahead, and there was one student who happened to be stuck in the snowstorm. I think he was on a bus or something like that. He hadn't heard that the university was closed. And he participated in that lecture fully via his mobile.
Is this problematic for you, Simon? You're looking deep in thought with that. It sounds great that, the development of technology means that in cases where there is a heavy snowfall, where students can't get to lectures, they're not missing out at all. But is that a worry? We might end up losing the libraries, and for the older generation, that's a key part of the community.
Oh no, look, I'm an early adopter when it comes to technology, so I love it. So I have my BlackBerry and I Skype people, and I've got my iPad at home. So I'm a huge fan of what technology allows people to do, how it allows, transforms people's lives, gives them access where they otherwise wouldn't have access. However, we need to recognise that there is still a value. There's a lot of value to face-to-face communication. We've evolved to be able to understand and make interpretations about people's behaviour based on what we see in their facial expressions, as Charles Darwin and many other people have pointed out. So there's still a strong value in face-to-face communication. There's still a strong value in written communication. So it's about not allowing one form of communication to rule out, to prevent us from using other forms of communication. And if I've got a choice to write a letter, if I've got a choice to pay my bill with a cheque that I send in the post, then I should be allowed to do that. And I shouldn't be priced out of communicating with people. I should be allowed to carry on doing it alongside being able to download an app on my iPad and play, Angry Birds if that's what I want to do. There should be that whole range, and we shouldn't be forcing people down a road of only being able to communicate in one form because it's easier, and actually, truthfully, because it's cheaper to the provider. And that a lot of this comes down to the fact that it is cheaper for the government to provide information electronically. It's cheaper for companies to do it. So actually, what we're actually doing is pricing people out of those forms of communication because the provider finds it easier and cheaper to only provide it in that form.
What's wrong with incentivising people to use the alternative where companies save money? They're passing on the savings. Surely that's a good thing.
Well, it is, but there's a fine line, isn't there, between an incentive and pricing someone out. So is raising the cost of stamps, is that incentivising people to move towards to electronic communication and email? I think actually it's actually disadvantaging and penalising people who want to send their letters by post. So I think there is some truth in what you're saying, and as I said, I think it's great that I can go and pay my my gas bill at 3:00 in the morning if that's what I choose to do. That's great for me, but there are people who don't want to do that, and what we shouldn't be doing is forcing those people to pay a huge premium in order to be able to do it.
David Stubbs, on the price rise of the stamps, it's going up 30%. We'll take the first class stamp as an example. It's going up from 46p to 60p. Is this a good move for the Royal Mail?
I think it's a risky move. I think clearly if people still use the service to the same level, then it will generate substantial increased revenues for them. And I think that's the intention, really, to give them a much increased profit, which makes them more attractive to sell to a potential buyer. It's very linked in with the move towards privatisation. But the risks for them are that people stop using the service so much and switch. and that a lot of the contracts for Royal Mail are done on a 2-yearly basis, and it may be that in the next review of the contracts with the large mailers who send over 80% of the letters sent, then they start to look at electronic alternatives or other media if they're advertisers, in which case Royal Mail may not get the extra revenues that it seeks.
Do you think there's a trouble in that I can pay the 60p at the end of the month to send a letter down the road, but also 60p to send a letter to Inverness?
Well, I think it looks odd to everybody. They think, well, distance must be a big driver of cost. And in the sense that intuition is right. Clearly, it should cost more for them to deliver to Inverness and to the next street. But on the other hand, they couldn't possibly really divide the prices for you to give you one price for next street and one price for Inverness. They could do a sort of zonal pricing, which may be that you had a local delivery that cost less than a national delivery. But that's a commercial freedom which is inconsistent with their obligation to provide a universal service obligation here, to provide a universal service postal service. So they haven't gone down that route for letters that we post. They are going down a zonal route for letters for large mailers in some occasions.
A reminder that you're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Daniel Cinna with today's discussion on the future of the postal service. Joining me is Dr. Chris Hutchinson from the School of Computing and Information Systems at Kingston University in London. David Stubbs is Managing Director at ESL and Network Consultancy, and Simon Bottery is Director of Policy at Independent Age. Dr. Hutchinson, a zonal mail system might be the way for the Royal Mail to make a profit, because if they do raise the price, we could see an even bigger decrease. It's 25% less post being sent at the moment as it was in 2006. Is there a worry now we're going to price people off the postal system and there's no way for Royal Mail to make a profit?
I think it's very much the case that people are being priced out of using the postal service, and it's not simply been a matter of cost. As I said earlier, I think closing of local post offices, sub-post offices, certainly had a very deleterious effect on the impact on the postal system. It was effectively driving people, those who were willing to do so and able to do so, to switch to electronic communication. And I think it's actually quite sad that people are not, therefore, being given the choice, are being priced out of the choice of using postal mail as well. I think that the issue of pricing per distance or per zone, I'm not sure that there's not a little bit of a red herring insofar as the postal service, whether one is sending a letter to Aberdeen or to the next street, even if it is to the next street, there will still have to be the postman in Aberdeen delivering for people in Aberdeen. So effectively, having a uniform price of 60 pence, as it's now going to be, means that effectively what we are doing is not paying for the delivery of that letter. First-class letter, what we're paying for is that fraction, minuscule fraction of the totality of the cost of maintaining the postal service, and undoubtedly putting the postal service into profit again.
Simon, is the price increase going to push more of the people, more of the older generation that you work with, away from the postal service? Or is it going to put them in a position where they're having to fork out so much money that they have to stop paying money on other things?
I think it's more likely to be the latter of those two, and unfortunately. I was totting this up actually as I came in on the tube, and there are some older people, many older people actually, who are surviving on say about £100 a week. Well, if you're sending one letter a day, even second class, that's £3.50 a week. That's 3.5% of your income just going on sending out mail. So I think what will happen is that in reality they'll tend to be people who don't have an alternative. They don't have access to email. They don't have access to the internet or they don't use it as much. So they'll tend to still need to use mail. They'll need to pay their bills by post, so they'll carry on doing that. The real tragedy, I guess, would be if they stopped writing letters to friends and family, sending cards because they couldn't afford it. I was talking to a woman in her 80s the other day. She gets 24 stamps delivered with her monthly shopping from Sainsbury's, and she uses those up during the course of the month. Now, what would be a real tragedy is if she felt that actually she couldn't afford 24, that she could only afford 15 or 16, and what went was those letters, those thank you cards, those birthday cards to the grandchildren. If those are the sorts of things that start to disappear, then that really would be a great shame.
Do you think there are other alternatives for the Royal Mail to make a profit? Because at the moment it is losing a huge amount of money. Postal volumes are a record low at the moment.
I think you're outside of my area of expertise when you ask me that question. There is something slightly odd, I think, in a way, in that the way to deal with the fact that volumes are going down is to raise the price. Clearly that disincentivises people to use it more. I think it is important, though, that we do preserve the sense of the universal cost. In many ways, what would be even worse than an increase in stamps would be if someone in a rural community or someone who lived some distance away from a city had to pay more to send or receive a letter. So I think preserving that universal cost is very, very important. Whether or not the post office has a more effective way of running its business, I really wouldn't argue on that one.
David Stubbs, you're a postal consultant. What would you be saying to the Royal Mail right now? They're seeing record low volumes, 25% less than they were 6 years ago, and yet they're hiking the price up.
Well, I think we have to see this in the context of the potential sale of the business. Well, while we talk about record low volumes are still higher than they were 15 years ago. So they went up quite considerably. Now they've come down a bit. When we look at revenues, Royal Mail had revenue growth of 5% last year, which isn't at all bad in the recession that we're in. So they have, if you like, put a negative spin on their performance over recent years. In part to get a better regulatory treatment. Okay, they've been losing money, but that's quite considerably related to the cost growth that they've had, and part of that's been pay growth. Royal Mail, the posties this year are getting a 4% pay rise, and if they hadn't had that pay rise, then Royal Mail would be in quite a nice profit. So the business itself, if you like, has chosen to lose money over recent years because it hasn't had the incentive to be profit hungry, and it's getting that now, and it's choosing to raise its prices rather than to reduce its costs, and that's what we're seeing. As to its future, it should have a good future. As I said, the revenues have grown by 5% last year, and that's been driven by strong increases in internet retail traffic.
But Simon's saying that with the increase in price, we're going to be drawing people away from the postal system now. They might have had a good year last year, but this year they've put the prices up by 30-40%.
Yeah, well, in theory it should deter some customers, but the calculation that Royal Mail's making is that most of its customers won't switch, that they don't have alternatives. And we've got to bear in mind that more than 80% of the volumes are driven by businesses rather than by consumers. And the businesses are sending out advertising mail, or they're sending out bills, or they're sending out statements to people. And even with these increases, the idea is that the Royal Mail will still have a competitive service to offer them compared to their alternatives.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you to all three of my guests. To Dr. Chris Hutchinson from the School of Computing and Information Systems at Kingston University in London, David Stubbs, Managing Director of ESL and Network Consultancy, and Simon Bottery, Director of Policy at Independent Age.